Welcome back to Snafu. I'm Robin Zander, and each week I sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and executives to talk about influence and persuasion in our chaotic world of work. My guest today, Sara Loncka, is the CEO of Experience Institute, where she and her team help organizations design transformational learning experiences that shape culture, unlock growth, and help people come alive at work. Her work sits at the intersection of leadership development, organizational change, and experiential learning, with a particular interest in how meaningful experiences can open up new possibilities, personally or professionally. Sara and I explore the importance of experiences and personal narrative, especially in times of change, the role of learning and development in shaping the trajectory of an organization, and why growth so often requires stepping into uncertainty. We also talk very personally about the importance of taking leaps in life as well as in work. Things like sabbaticals, reinvention, trying new skills, and learning how to begin before you feel ready. Sara also serves on the external advisory board of Susie Welch's NYU Stern Initiative on Purpose and Flourishing, which I'm pleased to have recently joined. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation about taking the leap before you're ready with my friend Sara Loncka. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
My absolute pleasure. Glad to be here.
We've spent a bunch of time together in person. We had very similarly busy months of March. We're recording this in April of 2026. And it's interesting. We first worked together at Susie Welch's conference at NYU Stern, and then together at the Transform conference in Las Vegas. I think the place I want to start is amidst all of the fear and uncertainty and chaos in the world today, how rapidly things are changing. You and I share a belief in the value of human experience. And so how would you think of, and it could be in-person experience, it could be recording remotely like we're doing today, but how do you think about human experience and what is the importance of that? And how do we do it differently, do it better, do it more in this chaotic world?
No warm up, huh, Rob? Okay. Human experience. How do we do it differently in this chaotic world? Okay. There's a few different angles I think we can explore. So I'll start, and then I want to hear your responses to them, and maybe we'll take it from there. But I think so. I run a learning company, and when AI really started becoming what everybody was talking about, we had a real moment of saying, okay, what does this mean for us as human experience designers and learning? Do we actually become a technology platform? Do we lean into AI? Do we lean away from AI? Like, how do we integrate this and how we think people come together, to get back to your question? And where we came down was, it's actually going to be even more important to have institutions, organizations, groups of people, individuals, whatever, that hold containers that are so focused on first order experiences of being connected in real life or being connected virtually, but that are like solely about how to connect people to people. And so it's not that we decided to be anti-AI or anti some of the things that like pull people apart, but we decided to really dig our heels into what made us different, which is bringing people together through experiences. So how do we do it differently now? I mean, I honestly don't know that it has to be so different now than before. It's like I recently I'm in this mastermind cohort of experience designers, and so that's been a sort of meta experience for me to go as an experience designer into a cohort of other experience designers being designed for experientially. And that is so much of the conversation that we tend to have. It's just like, this is becoming more and more important right now in an age that people feel further apart from each other, more isolated, whether that be ideologically or physically or both. So those are some of the conversations we're having. I think, so I could take this a couple different ways. I could talk to you about some of the things that we've been doing specifically, like what that looks like to bring people together in unexpected ways. Or I could talk more philosophically. What's your fancy?
I think what I'm most interested in is tactics for listeners, right? Is advice that you would give, not just as the CEO of your business, which we'll talk about, and there's a lot there about entrepreneurship in this day and age, but how do we make experiences tactical? I really like that you delineated ideological and physical proximity or difference because I think that those two as metrics are really interesting. I also, something that you said that someone highlighted for me recently is there are two kinds of companies right now, maybe three. One that are AI enabled, the next that are AI native, that were built
Mm-hmm.
for and of this time, right? In technology, we see SaaS platforms and then agentic AI. And there are SaaS companies that are trying to incorporate agents, or then there are technology companies that are built with AI embedded in the framework of the orgs. I think respectfully, there's maybe a third kind, which is not AI, but I think that those are gonna fail if I'm
Mm-hmm.
being blunt, right? Like even responsive conference, I run an in-person gathering. It's an AI enabled company. I record Zoom calls, right? It AI is built into how we run the conference at this point, even though the experience and what people come for has nothing to do with uh, AI as a tool in
Yeah.
person for gathering.
Yeah.
And so, how do we why does experience matter now more than ever? And how do we as humans, and then secondarily as organizations, create experiences?
So I want to first differentiate how I think about experience, because I think oftentimes it's funny. Right now I'm actually leading a whole campaign around how experience is what is leaning on past experience is what is sort of hurting and harming leaders, is like an over reliance on E. And we're going to use experience in that context as like a little e, as the things that you've accumulated, the assumptions, the past,
History,
yeah, the history, all of that
narrative.
in the
Yep.
past. Yeah. That like often in the world of leadership, people are so heavily reliant on because it's what's gotten them where they are today. But to your point, we're in such a different world. We actually have to learn how to untether ourselves from those past experiences in order to make smarter, more future forward decisions moving forward. So that's little e experience. But what I think you're talking about is like big E experience, which is like, how do we create intentional experiences for people to either come together as humans that work in the same place, as humans that live in the same community, people who have to relate together. So, and sometimes those things intersect, right? Because a lot of times what my work is creating those capital E experiences for people in companies so they can learn from them, and then they become sort of little E experiences. But I think, like, tactically speaking, since the very beginning of EI, but even outside of EI, which is the company I run, I will talk about Experience Institute. Um, I think about so I'm from Missouri. I grew up in a small town, rural America, and more than anything, I wanted to move to California from the time I was like 10. Don't ask me why. It got in my blood. I was like in a wedding in Palo Alto when I was 10. I wake up in the morning, I'm crying. My mom's scared because she's thinking you're sick and you're not going to be able to walk down the aisle. And I said, no, I just never want to leave this place. So from a very young age, I was destined to be here, and thankfully I made that happen. But all that to say, I came out to Los Angeles for college, studying film and broadcast journalism, and I really wanted to go in the arts direction, and that was part of the pull also to LA specifically. And one of the first things I did as a college freshman was go on this trip called LA 101, and it took us into the city for 4 days, a group of students. And I was very used to doing volunteer work and sort of like existing in spaces that were different than my own experience, from that lens. But this wasn't about volunteering. It was about learning from being immersed in an environment different from your own. So we visited a lot of different organizations that were working to solve specific social challenges. We spent time at like eating with people who were unhoused, and not just serving them, but actually eating and having conversations. So this was 4 days. At the end of every day, we had a big debrief about sort of like, okay, who are you in the midst of this space? How are you seeing yourself fit into this world? What is shifting for you? And really, what I didn't know then as an 18-year-old, what I know now is that I was going through a really incredible experiential learning trip that profoundly changed me. So I got back to campus, and I switched my majors to sociology. And this story is actually less about me going down a path of maybe justice oriented work, and more about me realizing how incredibly impactful being taken out of your own comfort zone, even for a short amount of time, and doing so in community in a way that disrupts the way that you see yourself in the world can actually have huge implications for the rest of your life. So for me, we can't, we can't always do that. We can't take 4 days or a month. People have I have a friend that just walked the Camino, huge experience for him, very life changing, right? We don't all have the opportunity and time and space to do that. But I think what is really important about designing experiences right now, particularly right now, are how do we design them in a way that create like a wedge in the hamster wheel of how people are living and thinking, so that they can sort of bring their head up and look around more expansively and question, kind of going back to the little e part too, like what assumptions am I bringing into how I'm viewing this person, this conversation, this problem, this world, this context, etc. But I think that most of the time, in order for people to do that, we have to have interruptive experiences that are
Mhm.
designed to do that.
Quick question, just to interject with something you said, because I don't actually know. What is Walk the Camino? I assume it's like walking the Pacific Crest Trail or the ACT or
Yeah.
similar.
Okay. It's across Europe, France and Spain. Um, and it is I'm not going to do it justice. But it's a really long walk. It's a pilgrimage, that people do. And you can do different lengths of it, but oftentimes it's multiple days.
Cool.
And you're really doing it to sort of get more in touch with you and
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, we're both in California hiking the Pacific
yeah,
Crest Trail, right? Like it's,
yeah,
one of those epic adventures.
yeah.
I like what you said, and I wanted to double down on it. Of right, you have these two different definitions of experience: the little e, which I would call narrative and self belief,
Mm-hmm.
right, and then experiences like responsive conference or Susie Welch's conference or gatherings together in person, experience house, where I think is what you were referring to before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these organizations and communities and events that bring people together, and the utility of what you call big E experiences to reform the narratives and self beliefs and stories that we tell about ourselves.
Yeah.
Is that what the Experience Institute does? Is that sort of what is the core of your work today?
So first of all, I love how you put that. The reforming, I think, is such a beautiful way to put that. It's not about confirming or doubling down, right? It's about creating that spaciousness to question and to reform and to reshape. Is that what EI does? I think like on a big level, that is what we aspire to do. We also work within the context of corporate culture.
Of course. Yes. We all have the aspirational
Yeah.
vision for our work. And then we also have the like, my work involves, answering Slack messages and sending email.
Exactly. um, well, actually, so I'll tell another story to talk about the origin of EI, and then how your question links to that. So, Experience Institute was founded in 2012, and our founder actually, he was about to pursue an MBA and realized that none of the programs he was exploring really were going to get to the heart of what he wanted to learn. Plus, they were incredibly expensive. And so he thought, why don't I just do my own thing, basically? So he designed what he called the Leap Year Project, because it was 2012, so it was a leap year. Did 12 apprenticeships around the world. We're talking like clothing manufacturers in China, to coffee farming in Guatemala, to working with a major homeless nonprofit here in Los Angeles, to the NFL, like really diversified experiences. And then wrote a lot about those experiences to share them more widely. And then beyond that, this was also at the like advent of the hashtag. And so he invited other people to take a leap. And the provocation there was, what would you risk in order to change your life, your community, or the world for the better? So people truly around the world were engaged also in this own experiential learning, sort of self-designed experimentation, and writing about it and capturing it with a hashtag. And so at the end of this year, he not only had this incredible experience of learning and growth and development himself, but also had spread it just widely and had captured hundreds and hundreds of stories. So, early 2013, he staged his own graduation on the TED stage and announced the origin of Experience Institute, which originally the mission was to establish experience as a credible form of education. So we were actually bucking up a little bit against higher education,
which is
and
quite a thing to buck up against.
quite a behemoth, one would say, and then created a fellowship quite similar to what Victor, our founder, had done for a number of years for people to self-design and explore. Um, so how am I going to bridging this at the core of Experience Institute? We don't do the fellowship anymore. Now we're solely in workplace learning, which is another funny story about how that came to be. But that spirit of experimentation, of self-designed learning, of thinking about what are my edges and how do I push beyond those edges before I get to panic and shut down. But in that sort of sweet spot of this feels uncomfortable, but productively uncomfortable, that's really where the majority of our work exists. So I think the philosophy I'm talking about around those like interruptive things is still very much there. When we're coming into a team or an organization, whether it's a 2-hour virtual experience or a multi-touch point cohort experience, we are from the very beginning trying to interrupt at the very least what people think corporate training is and how they're going to be expected to interact with this experience.
I'm fascinated by stories of entrepreneurship where there are successful successions, right? You clarified
Mm,
before we started recording, and I had known, but useful to hear, you're not the founder of
yeah,
Experience Institute, but you are the CEO. Tell me a little bit, maybe we'll come back to the backstory of you that led to stepping in as CEO, but
sure.
when you're dealing with a charismatic, ambitious founder who's built a thing, and then you're
Mhm.
coming in to maybe operationalize, maybe, create the longevity of, what's that been like? What have you learned, especially about navigating chaos? Speaking as a
Yeah.
chaotic founder myself, right? How has that been? What have you learned?
Yeah. Well, talk about leaping. And I would say like that's something that our entire team tries to do. It's like if we're going to be asking people to take themselves out of their comfort zone and continuously learning, how do we do that too? So it's been certainly a ginormous leap for me as well. I think Victor and I, the founder, we still meet regularly, and we talk a lot about honestly writing a playbook for healthy transitions, because I think we took for granted how smooth this has gone, but I think a lot of people really struggle with that, taking on that role in someone's absence. You're right. I mean, I came on more in a COO role. Like they had magic that they were making, and they needed someone to put a little bit of order to it and make it feel more sustainable and scalable and operationalized. And that is often the role that I play. Um, I like to say I'm a really good number two. Like you've got a great idea. Let me help make that happen and also tell you all the reasons it won't work so that we can either avoid those pitfalls or creatively work around them. Um, and so stepping into a role that actually required me to um, operate more in my creative, visionary, big picture thinking brain has been personally, I think, maybe the greatest challenge of it, because a couple of reasons. I think my relationship, and often other people will identify this, to productivity can come way more when you're like seeing things accomplished. And I think when you're in the operation seat, you're seeing things accomplished really quickly. Okay, this thing just used to be an idea, but now it's actually documented, and now everybody knows their role in it. Okay, we're looking at specific revenue numbers here, and now we've seen the impact of this process that we implemented go up. Like those things drive and motivate me, and I found it particularly hard to dedicate time to think. And I read about leaders and great thinkers, and start the day without your computer, start the day reading, start the day journaling. Um, and I think my own arc was recognizing that that was also productive and not just nice to do or nice to have in my ecosystem. But to answer your question about how we made that transition, it helps that from the very beginning of me working at EI, Victor and I had really open communication and really established ways to give feedback up and down, back and forth. It helped that we knew that we were bringing really different skill sets to these two different roles. And it helped that I think we both have learners' mindsets where I'm looking at him thinking like, oh, wow, he's so like, he will walk into a room and he will say, he'll whisper to me some idea he has. And in the back of my head, truly, I'm thinking that is the cheesiest thing. Like, we cannot do that. We are working with like corporate execs at a, real estate and investment firm. Like, they're not going to go for that. And he just buys in so fully that other people can't help but buy into. And so I really respect some of those aspects. And obviously he's good at much more than that, but that's one of those things that I stand back and really feel in awe of. And I think there'd be a number of things that he would say about me. So I think, having that base of mutual respect and appreciation for what the other person is truly bringing, and then having the difficult conversations when we're showing up in ways that are like not helping the team or not helping the company, or from the other person's perspective, we see that. So I think that was established really early in our relationship, which helped the transition go forward. And then honestly, I think it's a mix of both of our personalities. I think he was beautifully able to actually step back, which I think is really hard for a lot of founders to do. And to say, I said, just let us run for 6 months before we check in on anything. Like, you just got to let us go. And he did. And it was important for our team to find our own footing and redefine some ways of working together. And also, we have great relationships with our clients. Many of us do. They weren't just existent through him. But I think that was a big part of it too, being a small, really partnership forward, relationship forward organization, that we then took the centerpiece out of, how do we maintain those relationships? And that was a big question for us and thing to work to as well.
I want to come back to tactical for listeners, both
Yeah.
big E and little e. But before we do, give a couple of sentence broad overview for what the Experience Institute does, right? So execs at a real estate firm, like, give me some very concrete examples, and then
Yeah.
the what of what you and the organization brings to the table.
So Experience Institute is a learning and development studio. We work with companies across industries and sizes. Our sweet spot is really about the 1 to 15,000 person company, I would say. Everything we do is pretty consultative and bespoke. So unlike a lot of learning and development studios who say, here's our manager one program, let's deploy it. We come really with, I would say, an anthropological lens to say, like, great, we've built a lot, we've ran a lot, we know what has worked, but we also know that each culture and context is going to be different from the last one we operated in. And to like the overarching theme of this conversation, like, the time that we're in is very different than the time that we were in 6 months ago or a year ago. So how do we ensure that this particular experience, whether that be a 1-day offsite or a 6-month development program, is really, really contextualized to your people and your values and where your company is heading. So tactically or logistically, that looks like working with teams in a short form ways, like a day long offsite, and designing that for a company or a team. One thing that we have instituted this year, because we know that it's way more effective, is that experiences can be great in that sort of interruptive way I was talking about. But if you're actually trying to drive behavior change, especially in an organization, it is not enough to have a 1-day booster experience. You've got to have something following that for integration. So now, even when we work with teams on a 1-day basis, we'll do coaching that follows up so that each individual is able to really embed that in their workflow. So that's the shortest way we work with teams. Then we also have cohort ongoing programs of all variety of lengths, again, really contextualized to the environment. But we find ourselves mostly working across communications and storytelling, innovation, and then management as well. And also, all those things intersect all the time. So it's like we have these 3 buckets, but really we're touching and weaving in many of those through every experience. And then I think the second part of your question is, which like what makes us different. Um, well, clearly Experience Institute. So it's experiential, it's interactive, it's all applied to people's actual work. But I think more than that is that we still have this grounding philosophy of leaps, which is your individualized, self designed, and directed exploration. So even when we're all learning the same frameworks or tools or lexicon, how do you, Robin, take that into your work is going to be different than how I, Sarah, take that into my work. And so we always have a leaping period where people are actually designing an experiment to integrate that back.
One of the challenges that I hear folks who lead kind of leadership programs, I'm thinking of some friends, particularly in the chief HR officer, chief people officer space, is that if you help people take their leaps, oftentimes that leap might be away from the organization that hired you to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the repercussions is people reinvent themselves, and sometimes that means outside of the organization.
Yeah.
If you have a response to that, welcome. But that's just a funny anecdote that I've seen many times.
Totally. It's a funny anecdote, and it's something that we also get questions about for sure. So I definitely am used to that. I think one thing that we do, and I'm really happy because I think this is becoming way more of a conversation point in L&D circles than it was a few years ago even, is like, how is learning and development actually a strategic partner at a business outcome level?
Yep.
And so our leaps are not just personal, like I need to do this because I need to grow, but they're actually rooted also in a business outcome. So it might be, I'm trying to think of a clear example, like we work with one organization with all of their high potential leaders through their cohort program. And the company has 3 strategic pillars each year. So the leap that the person is selecting or designing for themselves is like something that's going to speak to their internal motivation, something that's going to make me actually curious about this, not just feel like an extra project, but it also has to ladder into one of those 3 pillars so that I'm also making the business case for this growth too.
I really like, and you started with your personal story of this tour experience of LA, right? Having been this Midwest girl who fell in love with California. Victor's similar, the leap year, and having this experience around the world, these experiences around the world that shaped who he was, who he became. So many of stories of my career, or even of meeting my wife personally or professionally, come from the experiences I had in the world that then shape, what do you call them, the little e experiences, the beliefs, the narratives that define who I am. And so I really like, for organizations, how do we access biggie experiences, right? Events and summits and offsites in the real world that shape the narratives people hold.
Yeah.
Other than doing an offsite with your company or traveling the world on sabbatical, actually was just sent a new book about sabbaticals. It's like, I thought this was not controversial enough that, but clearly it is, because somebody wrote a book about why everyone should take sabbaticals.
Yeah.
I really liked how you started telling the story of you as this Midwestern girl who moved to California, having fallen in love with California as a kid, and then had this experience of LA that really defined what that city was for you. And similarly, Victor took this leap year and created this experience that, you call it a capital E, life experience that then defined the narratives and beliefs that he held about himself. And that really kind of encapsulates what the Experience Institute does today. I think similarly for me, as you say, it's all connected. All of the stories that I might tell about my life are predicated on the moment I walked into a gymnastics gym and my life changed because I realized that I too could be a gymnast, and then had a career doing gymnastics. Or the work behind me is my mother's artwork of Moroccan textiles. My wife is Moroccan. Like, there are experiences that then become part of who we are, that become the beliefs and the narratives we tell. Other than taking a company offsite or going on sabbatical, how would you advise individuals, less organizations, but individuals looking to reinvent themselves in the age of AI, in the chaotic change that we're living through, to create those experiences deliberately in order to refine or redefine themselves?
Yeah, such a beautifully rich question. Yeah, I mean, this is like you're talking about you coming to your work, not just because you were interested in media, right, or marketing or creating events, but like probably for a whole stack of reasons that also just probably make the work not do not what am I trying to say? You can't not do it.
Yeah,
um
I had to start Xander Media because I
mhm,
realized that not having Xander Media was the mistake of my previous business, right? I
mhm,
couldn't not start Xander Media, regardless of working with clients. I had to do storytelling at scale.
mhm. Well, and there are few of us, and I wish there were more, but there are some of us who like feel that way about our work, right? That it's like you just have found this sort of deep alignment with self, that is really special and profound. And I think I love this question because it invites that part of how I see this work for me. Like this is just who I am. Like I'm curious about the moments in anyone's life, that create ripples of change. And I think what you're talking about too, like you walked into a gymnastics gym, like that is not, where am I going to college? Who am I marrying? Am I going to move across the country? Am I not? Like, we're so obsessed with these big things, like you said, sabbaticals or offsites, or like these big experiences that are supposed to and intended to create disruption and then therefore shifts in the way that we live or think or work. But actually so many of those things that those experiences that happen to us are quite small and many times coincidental or accidental or serendipitous, however you want to look at it. And so I've been curious about like, okay, well then how do I create an existence in which they're just more likely to happen, so that I'm
Mm.
sort of in a more frequent conversation of who am I becoming, who do I want to be, like what a privilege to be able to ask those questions and to explore those questions with your life. And so I think if someone's listening thinking like, yeah, I want to do that, I'm energized by that, or I'm scared by that, because both are great entry points, honestly. I think a couple of things, and one is a few years ago I was like, okay, I'm taking over as CEO. I got to really like even get more into this leaping thing. And so every month for, I guess it was 2024, I identified something that was just going to take me out of my comfort zone. And it was completely like, it was not about productivity. I mean, I took tap dancing classes for a month, and I was
Nice.
like, I'm not going to become a tap dancer, but like, how do I now see myself differently in this environment than I have when I come in and I get to be the expert, or I get to be the facilitator, which people are looking at as someone who holds the knowledge versus someone who's coming in completely uninitiated to this experience and brand new. Um, I started learning French, which is mind breaking if anyone has tried learning French as an adult, or any language really. But yeah, so I think one of the things I would say is just like, it doesn't have to be a list of things that you've always wanted to do. That's not the idea here. The idea is not to find new hobbies. The idea is to find new environments to place yourself in, that you're both going to learn more about yourself, that you're going to see yourself in a different way, and you're going to interact with people that you wouldn't otherwise interact with, because that's so much a part of that, is like the friction that comes from coexisting and collaborating and just being in the presence of people that you wouldn't otherwise be with. So that's one thing I'd offer. Actually funny, because I just wrote about this today in our weekly newsletter. So I used to run a political fellowship, and it was a 9-month full-time fellowship. The whole point of it was, well, not the whole point, but a huge chunk of it was teaching people to really challenge their assumptions and how they have come to view the world, in order to think more cross-sectorally and more critically when they're making, a lot of people wanted to go into elected office. So when you're going into making decisions for a populace, we hope we have highly critical thinkers, right? So that was the fellowship's intent. And one of the first exercises I had them do, which anyone here can do, is take a piece of jewelry, or for them, it was, many of them were watches, something that you frequently have on, and just switch it to the other side. And it's like a simple, simple thing, right? But you're shaking your head, so you know where this is going. It's like, it's that physical reminder that we are just on that hamster wheel of seeing the world how we see it, operating how we operate, not challenging ourselves about the way that things are going unless something kind of seismic or catastrophic
Right.
happens.
Breaks.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you suddenly go to lift your left hand, it's not there. Oh, wait, it's like even that moment of awareness, those sorts of practices I think are really important in addition to putting yourself into new environments that are going to push you out of your comfort zone, but just thinking about how do I put in a practice of pause and thinking about where I am right now or how I'm showing up or why I'm making the decisions I'm making, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's really just a deep practice of reflection, but that can be really hard for people. So sometimes it's nice to just have that little cue or that reminder um, to stop, to think.
Yeah. One of my most ridiculous ones in maybe 2023 or 2024, I started fasting, doing water only fasts first for 24 hours. And then the longest I've done is about 6 days.
Mm.
That month alone, I did, or that year alone, I did 65 days in aggregate of
Wow.
water only fasting, which is a little more than most people should do. But there's a lot of very interesting research showing the benefits of fasting. And even more than that, even more
Hmm.
than the physical changes I experienced, the interruption, the pattern interruption that changes fundamentally your relationship to food. And to
Yeah.
see that your body is capable of so much more than we thought was possible.
Yep.
Perhaps my favorite YouTuber is a woman named Michelle Correa, who runs a show called Challenge Accepted, where she
Mm.
goes and ridiculous physical stuff, which as a sort of lifelong and certainly former athlete, I love. But running 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days, right? Like, um, ridiculous things, and also just very deeply human things, going and
Yeah.
trying a Butler Academy. And we all aren't perhaps, YouTube creators making a living by doing self experiments, but that idea of teaching myself, I'm left-handed, teaching myself to
Hmm.
write with my right hand, wild, like a
Hmm.
completely humbling experience. Learning to draw over 30 days, there's a great book,
Hmm.
How to Draw in 30 Days, that you become capable of doing things that you did not realize that were possible.
Yeah. One follow up to that, and I see you got another question, but I'm like what you're naming with the fasting thing too, I think is a really important part of this because the examples I'm giving are like, yes, I didn't want to be a famous tap dancer, but like it also brought me joy, right? It
Of
was like
course.
something that was interesting and like it pushed me, but I also was like, this is fun and this is novel. And I think the other side of it is like, what are the experiences that you can do that actually aren't necessarily fun and novel, but still are really valuable? And so, actually, recently for our Q1 sort of team experience, at the beginning of the year, I gave everybody a stipend and an individualized prompt about pushing themselves out of their comfort zone because I know the team well. Some of them were like, okay, you need to do this and you need to find something that's going to be a leap in a way that puts you in the beginner's seat that like you don't know, you know way less than everybody else in the room, and what kind of discomfort does that bring up for you? For me, I was like, I love leaping so much, like I have to do something that I'm not going to love, like that I actually don't want to do, and like sit with that kind of discomfort. um and So I went to a hyper evangelical church service,
Oh, cool.
which I I grew up in the church. Actually, my dad's a minister, so it's not an environment I'm not familiar with, but it is an environment I have intentionally not engaged in for a couple decades. And now it's a really different environment even than when I was in it 20 years ago. And I have to tell you, Robin, it really, I mean, it was so challenging because I sat there saying, the only thing you have to do for this hour and a half is be curious. And curiosity is something that comes really naturally to me and I pride myself in. And I could not be curious to save my life. I mean, it was just like, if you could have had a recording on my
I would
face.
have loved that. Absolutely. 100%.
So I say, I offer that because I think, yes, there is like, if you're just beginning this journey, please find things that feel energizing to you. We all know there's so much that is draining us right now. So find those experiences that can push you and energize you. But if you're like, yeah, that is me, then like flip the script. How do you find the things that actually aren't energizing but are still really valuable? And then reflect on that, which is what we did with the team, was think it's not just about the thing that we did, but how did you feel in that experience and what are you taking moving forward?
I normally come into an interview knowing what we're going to talk about and why we're sitting down to talk before we record. With you having spent a bunch of time together last month, I was just like, I had an inclination that we would have an interesting conversation. And this for me is it, because that love of self experimentation, of pushing boundaries, I'm fascinated, right? There's a lot that's been done in courage in the face of fear with, for example, like Joe Rogan's Fear Factor back in the day,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
or I mentioned Michelle Carre or Tim
mm-hmm.
Ferriss, right, as a famous self experimenter. But this uh, more emotionally attuned focus on self experimentation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've told a thousand times the story of starting up Robin's Cafe on 3 weeks' notice, and then selling it 3 years later on Craigslist. And everyone laughs over Craigslist. But for me, the thing that matters and the thing that shapes who I am today and has for the last decade is who I became through starting it
Mm-hmm.
and through learning how to go from nothing, right? I had no restaurant experience. I was not a restaurateur or a chef, to running a successful business in the city and county of San Francisco in 3 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
right? I tell the story often of spending a year studying ballet at 27 and 28 years old alongside 12-year-olds in tutus, right? Incredible life experience. The point is not that I was practicing ballet. The point is the humility and the
Yeah.
moral sense of like all of my friends are succeeding in tech and building professional lives, and I am taking, off my work life and putting on black tights and a white shirt and doing pas de deux partner in men's class alongside 12 to 16-year-olds. And the
Mm-hmm.
humility and the moral kind of like questioning of that, who I became as a result of that practice,
Yeah.
is really the interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
Um, I want to go somewhere personally, and
Okay.
if this isn't something you want to talk about, we'll cut it out.
Sure.
But you are expecting in a month,
Mm-hmm.
and as you were talking about these choosing these new adventures, I also think there's something to like your body is changing. You said at the start of the recording that you are learning how to breathe differently because obviously you are gestating a human.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how are you thinking about using the experience of being pregnant and soon to give birth to be one of these leaps? How are you preparing yourself as somebody who has spent what seemingly is a lifetime preparing
Mm-hmm.
for leaps, but this one is one that is biologically happening to you?
Yeah. Well, I'll double down on that by saying um motherhood was not something that I knew that I would embark on. It was not ever a leap that I thought I or knew I wanted to take. And so I think it's been a series of like mini leaps even getting to this part, which we won't we won't necessarily discuss here, but I will answer your question to say that this has been a really different one for me because I think there's an element of not of having less control than in most of the other leaps, right? Like sure there's elements of that I can't plan for in any of the things I've talked about. Learning French, like okay, what does my mouth do? Like am I one of those people that is good at forming sounds, or is it a bigger challenge? Like I can't control that until I can work harder to control it. I'm still working on that, but I think pregnancy has actually been a huge learning in like I'm just more in a constant state of curiosity, and it's also so like it changes all the time,
Every
so you
day.
don't you don't reach like a level of stasis of like, oh, I get it now. Like maybe you get to that point and then it changes again. So I think um for me this leap, I suppose, of like the pregnancy phase, and then we can have another conversation after the baby's here because that will be a whole nother whole
Deal.
nother thing, has been just like I think becoming in a deeper state of awareness of my body. I'm a really cerebral person. So like
Mm.
this is a leap that is hard for you to like create in yourself. Like how do I just be less cerebral? Like how do I actually set the intention at the beginning of 2025. I want to get less in my head and more in my body. I want to understand how to make decisions from a body place versus just a thinking analytical place. And then 8 months later I was pregnant and I thought, oh, well, there's your answer. Like you have no option,
You ask and the universe delivers.
exactly. And so I think, we talked earlier about like there are these things that happen to us that then require us to make sense of them and meaning, and we grow and we learn about ourselves through them. And then what we migrated that conversation into is like, but how do you actually intentionally create those moments and not just wait for them? And I think I've had a decade of intentionally creating those moments. And now this one is sort of a mix of both, right? Which is like you can try to make this experience happen to yourself, but then like you're sort of just on the road and on the ride. Um, and you're learning from it as you go. So yeah, I think the thing that people keep asking when you're pregnant is like, what are you most excited about, or what are you most scared about? And I think is probably pretty in line. I mean, I'm excited about a lot and I'm scared about a lot. But I think the thing that I keep going back to is like, oh, I'm really curious about who I will be in friction with this new human or in partnership with this new human. Like this is not just a pathway of, bringing another life into the world, but it's also a pathway of like, who am I as a mother and how does that then change who I am and the other contexts of which I live my life, because I'm going to learn about myself through that. So that's something I'm anticipating happening, which is pretty on brand, I'd say.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that
Yeah.
sharing and that vulnerability. There are a million questions. I actually have more questions now than I did at the start of the interview, and I want to be respectful of your time. Um, where can folks listening and watching go to learn more about you personally and also about the Experience Institute?
Yeah. Um, Come by Experience Institute website, I would say. It's just expinstitute.com. And we release about you are prolific in your writing. I don't do quite as much writing as you do. But we try to release about a bi-weekly newsletter, and so folks can keep up a little bit there. And then also on LinkedIn, like I think, EI is, we're out and about. Like you said, we met at Susie's conference, then we met at Transform. So we're like in the ecosystem trying to meet people and offer our support. And we're also highly relational. So you can, you can truly email EI and some human will get back to you, and talk about, your own personal leaps or your company leaps or any of that. And that's just at hello@expinstitute.com.
Great. Sara, this is great. I would very much like to do a part two sooner rather than later. I'm excited to talk about more your learnings as CEO and leadership in this chaotic world, but I think we've covered
Yeah.
a lot of very interesting topics. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for making it a fun hour.
Thanks for tuning in to Snafu. One quick thing before you go, and that is the Snafu newsletter. If you would like to receive an article from me every week, as well as a couple of things that I've loved from throughout the week, go to my personal website, robinpzander.com, and join the newsletter. It comes out every weekend. I would love to see you there. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the Snafu podcast.